Welcome back to Morning Express. Time now for our newsroom discussion, and focus this morning is on the close of the mass voter registration exercise that took a month, and 3.7 million Kenyans so far registered. But our focus is on whether the media did a good job in interpreting the numbers and just what they mean to you as a citizen. Michael Gitonga will be driving that conversation. Let's get right to it, Michael.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'll start first of all by introducing the panel that we have here this morning. And I'll start with my immediate left. We have Victor Bwire, who is the Deputy CEO for Media Council of Kenya. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Next to him, we have Eric Odur, who's the Secretary General for Kenya Union of Journalists, KUJ. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Eric Latif. Today we have two Erics. Eric Latif, who's a journalist.
Be careful. Good morning.
And last but not least, we are also joined by Professor Wainaina, who is also going to be with us as we continue with this discussion. So let me start with you, Victor, and just looking at the recently concluded mass voter registration exercise, but more or less focusing from our perspective, whether we got the information out there, and politicians, some people say it made it look like it's an emergency. Did we play into that narrative that it's an emergency, a matter of life and death as it were, especially in light of other things that were happening, for example, the doctor strike?
Thank you, Mike. One, yes, politicians did set the agenda, unfortunately, and we fall prey. We followed, and we have been following them and publicizing their dancing and their posting.
Is it really following, or is it the fact that this is what is making news? Because sometimes we have we're caught between a rock and a hard place. There is what's making news, and there is following.
I think there's some time we missed it in the sense that other than, and if you follow even of what we have been, how we have been reporting, we made voting, not getting a voter register criminal, like it's a criminal offense. It's a matter of life and death. And this purely was a narrative being spewed by the politicians, that if you don't get a vote, if you don't get, you will not get this service, you will not get this. And we fall sort of asking the hard questions in the sense of, is the agenda there, the narrative, the right narrative? Even the mass voter registration, we even at some stage lost it, that the Constitution provides for continuous voter registration up to some few days to elections. And we made the 16th February, 16th March to be like, it's the only period for registration.
The only window that's open.
And that thing has come out very lately when, I went to court. We had missed it in Nashville to say, are we doing the right thing? Two, again, sometimes it would seem, and even when we are looking at the extensions, when the courts were giving the extension, the narrative was about the monies that IBC would spend extra, and it has just become a business on money. So to me, I felt that at some stage we were following, we are not dealing, and we fell prey to just following, and even in the presentation of data, like yesterday, you see even the Constitution we no longer have provinces. But we are stuck, media, we are stuck with Rift Valley leading, Central leading. That's not there anymore. Media, we also need to devolve in our reporting and start thinking about counties, the 47 counties and how people. So when we start thinking of Western Nyanza, those things are no longer there. So to me, again, we are still stuck. We are gradually picking up.
Okay. Eric Odur, yes. Do you agree that we are following a narrative of the politicians?
Yes, I think we allowed the politicians run away with the mass voter registration exercise. Because actually IEBC was completely lost into the picture, because actually it's supposed to be the work of IEBC to spearhead the process. But immediately we allowed the politicians to come in and run away with the process. Then the politician will come with a narrative, because by the end of the day, the politicians are looking for the numbers and the people who are going to vote for them. They are not looking at the informed citizenry that is going to go to the polls and make that choice. Is about me, and that's why every politician was coming up with this story that this thing is going to, the voting and the elections are going to be won immediately the mass voter registration exercise concludes. Then if we allow the politicians to do that, then that means that the citizens actually are lost in the mix. So I think that's where the problem is, that we did not allow the other players like IEBC, they're supposed to be leading the process to do so. And that is why this time around we did even see the advertisements that was being done and even the mobilization that was being done by the IEBC. It was not there because the politicians had already run away with the process.
Okay. Yeah. Eric?
I think IEBC got lucky. IEBC got lucky because politicians took over this process. And in the end, it has helped IEBC reach 95% of their target. the fact that IEBC actually got to that 95%, those 3 million people, it's because politicians went out and spearheaded and campaigned for voter registration. And also that the media covered this widely. If you look at the media mix and the coverage that this whole exercise has received, look at how much was paid advertising by IEBC and look at how much was actually coverage by the media. I think, one, the media did a good job in covering the whole issue and sensitizing the issue of mass voter registration, and the exercise was going on. I agree with what Victor is saying, that in that whole story, the media also got carried away and stopped telling the story from that objective perspective, that, you know, this is just a mass voter registration exercise. The voter registration is continuous, that this is going to go on until this time, you know, giving those timelines. It was 14th of February was the end, and if you do not register by the 14th of February, then you basically should have no voice until 2022.
Which is not true.
Which is not true. You know, that's the narrative that came out. And also, covering so much of the politicians, it was good to cover the politicians, but like I've said before, we fall prey to the politicians. And, you know, starting to what Victor is saying and what Eric is saying, giving them the coverage like they are the owners of the election is wrong. I keep saying that the most important stakeholder in an election is the voter, not the politician.
Or the politician.
And we allowed them to vote, I mean, to campaign for the August poll. I mean, it was purely a campaign.
It was a campaign.
August. It was no longer about voter
It was not even a voter registration exercise. It was more of a campaign. Yes, Prof.
I hope that the IBC does not hold Latif's view that they got lucky. They didn't get lucky. Every time a process is hijacked by politicians, it cannot be in the interest of anybody else apart from the politicians themselves. So IEBC shouldn't think that it got lucky. I think, and ourselves, what we need to start asking ourselves is, why was this the most vigorously and aggressively mobilized voter registration process in the history of voting in this country? And what is this stake that the politicians have in this process that made them come out with guns blazing? I have made the argument before that 2017 is not an important election. 2013 was a hugely important election. We didn't see this kind of coming out by politicians to have people register. The only difference is that 2017 is a hugely important election to the political class, not to the people. The last time we had an election which had this high stakes for the politicians was 2007, and we know what happened. So we need to start rethinking, and that's why I said, if anybody thinks that we are lucky because the politicians are in this, I think we have something else coming. Yeah, because when the stakes are this high for the politicians, nobody is safe.
Eric Odor, could we have missed that particular point, that there is something brewing, especially from the political class, and we're so busy on a day-to-day basis, voter register, you know, NASA, presidential flag bearer, until we forget what really is exciting the politicians or getting them, mobilizing them to be so aggressive on this voter registration exercise?
Yeah, it's true. Actually, the media did not ask the tough questions. Number one, I've not heard or I've not read it anywhere where somebody is explaining the targets. How did IEBC come up with this target? Where were they expecting to get these numbers? Because we are talking about...
I think it was based on the fact that we have 6 million ID card holders that are not registered.
Yeah, because that was an assumption. Because where are these people? Because, again, we've seen the kind of mobilization that has been done. Where haven't we gotten even 5 million people coming out to register? So those are the questions that we are supposed even to be interrogating, that where did we get these figures? Then number two, when the politicians now start running away with the process, why can the journalists also now try to bring the process back on track and try to tell the public what is happening? Because right now, like Professor said, the stakes are high. And the stakes are high because, number one, we have the presidency that must, or we have a president that must make sure that he gets 2 terms, because it's always known that in Africa, there is narrative that in Africa, a president must complete his term.
You have to complete all the
term.
time.
So number two, that's why the reason actually, right? That's why you can see even now the politicians are going up. Then
But you see, the stakes are not just high because of the presidency, because the opposition
that's my next point. Then again, number two, we are also talking about the opposition, and the opposition, actually, the opposition leader has always said that this is the last bullet. So that also tells you that even the stakes are also high in the opposition.
It's his last chance.
So it's his last chance. So that means that both the opposition and the government or the incumbent have to go out there and mobilize to make sure that their interests are covered and protected.
Okay, Eric, the fact that, and professors mentioned this, the fact that when politicians hijack a process like this, it has nothing to do with the citizenry. It is more to do with the politicians. Have we brought that out? Do the citizenry from the media get that aspect of the whole thing?
No. And I said it from last year. When politicians start running with the election, trying to work on the electoral system, that is wrong. When they started talking about IEBC and kicking Isaac Hassan out, that was the first sign, and we said it. Once we start giving the politicians that leeway to actually go out there and say, this man must go home, this man is bad, let's change the electoral system, let's change the electoral commission, that's wrong. That was completely interfering with the electoral commission. Look at what they've done now. They've come in and taken over, yes, so you guys open that thing, say from 14th to 14th, now let's run with it. This is our process. And you've seen them standing up in political rallies and saying, our brother Chebukati, you should remember what happened to Isaac Hassan. That is...
It should be worrying.
It is worrying. But is the media covering it from that angle? No, it's not. Is the media seeing that as a problem? Probably it is, but there's also, I sort of feel the pressure in the newsrooms. Remember in 2012, 2013, there was all that, pressure of trying to streamline and making sure that, we are editing out everything that comes in and saying this must follow a certain route. And there was a lot of backlash after the 2013 election. Was the media compromised? Did the media play its role? Was the media helping us, or was the media pushing the narrative of, accept and move on? Was the media right? I think that's a pressure that the media is having right now. But the media, the editors should sit back and say, look, this is our profession. This is how we do things. This is how we do things the right way. It doesn't matter who you are. We shall do our job the way we're supposed to do our job.
All right, Victor.
And thanks. And one of the things we are investing, and we are asking media houses to invest. While election reporting is not any different from any other reporting, but this is a process that needs some proper preparation. And proper preparation, not just buying more cameras, but we need also to invest in human resource. Who is manning our desks who are dealing with the elections? Given the high stakes we are talking about, we need some preparation. We need some investments. Data journalism. Who is looking at this data and comparing? Because when somebody just says 6 million people have identity cards are lying, there are people who have 3 or 4 IDs who will never go for those IDs.
Yes.
So the 6 million might be ghost people. I mean, I come from Busia, for example. I register, my ID shows that I come from Busia, but I've registered in Mombasa as a voter. So the mere fact that my details show that I come from Busia does not necessarily mean that I'll vote there. So when we start using such data, it's wrong. We have already premised on a wrong foundation. So we need data journalism. We need people to start looking at this data and comparing. And when you talk about 19 million, because I've seen figures being thrown all over, 28 million, 19 million. But how many of these people are interested in voting? 2, how many? I remember in the constitution I come from, we were 38,000 registered voters at that last election, but only 17,000 people voted. So even the 19 million, when we start calculating using the 19, yesterday I was asking if there's an aspect of journalism called speculative, because people are just speculating. It's too much speculation. But yes, we need interpretative journalism. We need people to look at figures and compare.
Okay.
So to me, we need to invest in the sense of how are we, when IBC, for example, and we are being against too soft, media is being too soft on IBC, so far. And we need to ask this question. If they have said, if politicians have done this process of mobilization for them, what budget, what the money that they had spared for example, voter registration, have they shifted it to another more demanding thing? When they start meeting political parties in their offices, instead of calling a meeting of all political parties on a neutral ground and dealing, What are we allowing? Are we seeing anything wrong here? So we need to ask IBC more hard questions.
Okay. All right. And just a quick reminder for those of us watching, the Twitter handles are displayed as we go along. Michelle will be coming in with a response not too long from now. But, Prof, let me come to you. And I think, Victor, you alluded to that fact, the fact that even as media, we are still pushing the, as it were, the tribal or ethnic narrative when we look at things from a region perspective. And, Prof, we also have this narrative so far that we are pushing. There is Jubilee and there is NASA. There is no third option. Is that really the truth?
I have said before that it is wrong to assume that NASA and Jubilee are two different things. NASA and Jubilee are the same political class, only that part of the political class is on the inside and overeating, and the other one is on the outside and overshouting. If things changed, nothing would change. These guys who are overshouting would start overeating, and the ones who are overeating would start overshouting. When we are talking about the narrative that the political class is pushing, these guys have no other narrative apart from tribalism. And that is why, on Monday, Omar Hassan was telling us about this guy who was campaigning for Raila in Kisumu. And somebody asked him, why are you wasting your resources? If you want to, you go and campaign for Raila in Kiambu. You don't have to campaign for Raila here.
Here it's a done deal.
It is a done deal. And unfortunately, what the media house has done is that media outlets have done is that they have taken this ethnic narrative and as a gift to the politicians, it has splashed it on their headlines. So that the biggest loser here are the people. Because like I said, our challenge is not NASA versus Jubilee. It is the political class versus the people. Because when you push the tribal narrative, then there is no space for alternatives. And alternatives are there. The problem is not the possibility of the alternatives. The problem is lack of imagination because the politicians have made us believe that the ethnic narrative is locked in. It is locked in for them. Do we, as the people, have alternatives? Yes, we do. Is there a possibility of those narratives having expression in a media that has already locked in the tribal narrative? Very difficult.
All right. Victor, do you think we've been creative enough? Or just go ahead.
And one of the things, while it's a business decision and would sell, we already see media again playing the hands of this tribal card by this edition issues. That Mombasa has, Coast has a standard edition. Central has a central edition with
which
different
the headline
headlines.
may even be different depending on where the edition is going.
And we are telling Nyanza that when the headline is Raila, buy. In Mombasa, if the headline is Omar, buy. So that's exactly what we are doing, that we are still pushing our people to start thinking that I only buy a newspaper if my person is the headline. And yes, it's a business decision because media houses want to get money. But look at it in what we are talking about. If we are going to play in such, then we are entrenching tribalism. That's exactly. We are telling people, read about your people, which is not very good for. So again, as obviously most of the newspapers, both Standard Nation, I've seen they have already started pull-outs specifically for election, which we hope we would not play the edition thing, so that we allow Kenyans to read and know about other Kenyans.
And also to know that there are alternatives.
The alternatives.
All right, Eric Odur, how do we move this conversation forward? Because we seem to always get caught in that trap of literally mouthing what the politicians say. And of course, like Prof says, that is to their benefit. Wanjiku is still left with nobody, caring for them. Yet, our responsibility, we are meant to be the eyes of the people, the mouth of the people.
I think the way forward, and Victor maybe will also explain to that, I think as the industry and the stakeholders in the industry, we've now developed elections reporting guidelines that journalists are going to use to report on elections, so that we set the agenda and allow the people to be the first or number one choice of people we serve. Because as we speak, we are serving politicians. And we are always looking for politicians. And that is why right now, even if you look all the headlines are talking about the politicians, and there are also the narrative that has also been developed in the newsroom that so-and-so sells the newspaper. And therefore, in a week, you must have this person on the headline. Otherwise, we are not going to sell the newspapers. So if we can start now focusing on the issues that actually are going to affect, that are also going to play a key role in the elections, then I think we'll be doing a service to the people. Otherwise, we are also going to mislead the people. And just like I said, these elections, the stakes are so high, and therefore everybody and every politician who is in the arena wants to win the numbers. And if we also fall prey to that, like my colleague has said here, then we are going to mislead the country. We must now set the agenda and focus on the issues.
Okay.
Here's the problem. Here's the challenge. The challenge is, yes, you know, from the Media Council, they come up with guidelines. And, you know, they release those guidelines, and they call in, you know, journalists, and they take them to workshops, and they tell them these are the guidelines. Where is the buy-in, and who needs to buy in? You see, the problem with our media is we have two big media houses. Let's just say that. And then the others have come up. Those two big media houses that own the papers have completely owned our narrative in this country. And when these two media houses, the day they decide that this is how we're going to do it different, that's when even that guideline and everything and everything that the Media Council comes up with will move. Right now, we are talking about, you know, how things should be done right. But can you walk to the Nation Media Group and tell the Nation Media Group board that this is how we shall do it? Can you go to Standard Group and say this is how we shall do it? Can we force the media houses to actually adopt these guidelines? Because if we can't, then we're still doing the same thing. We're still not going to be able to change that narrative. It's a business decision, like you said, but to what extent? Is there a way in which you can actually force that business decision to change so that
we now take up our role?
The tenets, yes, the tenets of journalism are the ones that are leading the way.
Victor, new guidelines, is that really going to change anything? Or like Latif says, there is that challenge whereby you have guidelines, but they remain just that, guidelines.
No. Why I say no? The guidelines have been developed in a way that we have involved the same media houses. Your editorial manager and some of your editors are involved, the Nation and all the media houses. And what the guidelines are speaking to are not different from what the guidelines for example, Standard Media Group is, or Nation Media Group, or Media Max. Those guidelines are an enforcement from our regulatory point of view. And why we feel that these guidelines will be used and not a waste is that some of these laws, just like the other laws outside media houses, is just individuals to enforce them. Much of what is happening in media just needs staff decisions by editors. So that we tell sales and advertising department that yes, we need the money because we get money from advertisement, but there's a minimum point where we cannot go beyond as a public good, because media is not pure. I mean, if you look media purely as a business entity, then sometimes you lose. And we are seeing media houses increasingly taking purely a business approach to doing all their businesses. So we need to be helped, and we're given examples in Manzoni and the rest, where we have past editors, Joe Dindo, Ngedi, and the rest, and others, who, if they make some decisions, they can help the industry. So we are calling upon some tough decisions from our colleagues in the editors, sometimes to say that the country is bigger than business sometimes. And yes, board of directors want money, they want profits, but at what expense? At what expense? Because if the country goes into problems, even those profits will not come.
And I think one of the things that actually the key objective of the guidelines are that we are trying now to push for professional autonomy, and actually those are the words that are used in the guidelines, so that the business does not take advantage and also take over the professional autonomy of a journalist. A journalist must make judgment based on his ability to understand that subject, and that's what we are talking about. We do not make decisions based on business interest, and that's what we are saying. So we are saying that let's now have two divides here. Where we have professionals here, then we have business here. Then let's see how the business does not take over the interest of the professional.
And we have given examples. We have given lightly, Joe Cardi gave this example. The same politicians who are the same businessmen in this country own hospitals. Do they go to the hospital and tell doctors, this one has malaria. Why can't editors sometimes tell them that this is a professional decision?
Leave us to do the work
it's an investment you made,
right.
but at some level, this is purely a professional thing. Leave the profession to handle it.
All right.
Okay,
Prof, I want us to move on to something else, and this is to do with numbers, because now with the end of the voter registration exercise, we are looking at numbers and figures. We have 3.7 million new voters. Of course, the politicians are going to take that and spin it to their advantage to, try and influence how we think. Now, what is our responsibility at this point in time in breaking down those figures and letting people know exactly what they mean?
I'll answer that in relation to a statement that has been made here that our problem is regulation and policy. I don't think that our problem is regulation and policy. I think our problem is lack of imagination. The figures that are being interpreted here are being interpreted to reinforce the ethnic narrative that has been sold to us, to the media, by the politicians. The question is it possible to use the same figures to support an alternative non-ethnic political narrative? It is possible. Are we using these figures to tease out an alternative non-ethnic political narrative? Absolutely not. What we are interested in is saying Western, Rift Valley, Central. What are you even referring to? Because those things don't even exist. I will give you an example. When you look at the figures in terms of registration, it is possible to make a women argument, for example, who to be non-ethnic. Okay, we have what is the percentage of women, and therefore what is the women constituency, and somebody who wants to mobilize differently, what do they need to tell the women to mobilize them as a voting base or as a constituency? It is possible to make an economic argument. Okay, how many of these people who are registered are small-scale farmers, are small business owners, are Juakali artisans, and what kind of economic narrative can we spin out of that to mobilize them as a constituency? Those are just some of the possibilities that exist in these numbers. But the only possibility that is now on the headlines is the ethnic one. And that's why I said the problem is not regulation, it is not policy, the problem is lack of imagination. We are unwilling, and I think to some extent unable to imagine alternative non-ethnic political narratives.
Eric, do you agree? Because you're a journalist, and looking at the figures that we're getting and from what Prof is saying, are we lacking imagination in looking at those figures from a different lens other than just the province, which don't even exist?
Probably we lack not imagination, but the motivation too. You see, back to the issue of coming up with the guidelines and policies and all, it's not that the journalists in the newsrooms do not know what they're supposed to do. They all do. It's not that these guidelines are actually coming to tell people something different. It's something that people know. It's not that the editors do not know. The editors that you've met and come up with, formulated these guidelines with, no. But they're the ones who are running the show, and they're the ones who are spewing out these headlines. Why are they spewing out the headlines? It's not because the board has actually said, no, tomorrow's headline must talk about regions. It is because they have decided that this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to compete at this level. And if we are competing at that level, then what I'm saying is we need a different kind of motivating factor that will make you want to tell the story in a different way.
But what more can motivate a journalist other than telling the story the way it should be told? Other than, just literally saying things as they should be said?
It's that self-motivation. It's sitting down and deciding, look, I want to tell a story, and I want to tell a story differently. I want to tell a story, and I want to tell a story that will make sense to people. There are people who will read that story, and they will see the story making sense. There are those who will laugh and say, surely, what headlines are these guys? What headlines are these guys done? How many have they sold today? But, consistent and persistency on telling that story that way, and then you, over time, win over people.
Actually, what we are saying is that even through the guidelines, we are just trying to remind journalists that actually we are allowing people now to make us look like we are the conveyor belts.
Yes.
We are making people think as if we cannot think We can only say what they want. And exactly that was the guideline is trying to remind journalists that, hey, you are journalists, you are trained, you are professionals, there's a role you are supposed to play. And therefore, you must make a decision based on your ability to understand what you are talking about, not what a politician or not what a politician wants you to say. Exactly that was what we are telling journalists, that yes, we can now start imagining the way our Prof is saying. We start interrogating these figures, because if you've been given these figures, for example, and he was talking about looking at the small-scale farmers, looking at the women farmers, who is talking about even the nominations right now? Because the nominations that are supposed to be done by the political parties are actually supposed also to take care of the special interest groups.
Yes.
What is going to happen? All these issues are going to be forgotten and the politicians are going to run away with it. You'll see that so-and-so has nominated the girlfriend, so-and-so has nominated a brother, so-and-so has nominated a cousin to take over the position that are supposed to be taken over by to represent the special interest group. So what we need to do is start interrogating these figures and these facts as we are given by the politicians.
Okay.
And including voting trends. Yeah. Because it's different. If a constituency had 38,000 or 40,000 last election, and only 60% voted, what makes you think that even if you push them to register 70,000, they will vote 100%? So the assumption that all people would vote. We need also to see voting trends. How have these constituencies been voting? How are these counted? So there's more to the figures than what we are reading and giving the public. We need to help people to start digesting those figures, so that it's not a life and death issue of about how many people registered in which constituency, no, but also it's more than just those numbers.
The numbers that we're looking at. All right, let's move on to something else which has been prolonged and protracted right now, and this is the doctor strike. And Prof, have we told an all 360 story? Or have we taken the doctors, who most of them possibly have a whole network where they can get treatment if they wanted or afford? Then we have the government or the politicians in the other hand, who again, despite the strike going on, can still get medical help if they wanted. They probably have doctors they can call to their house.
Yes.
But we have the Mwananchi,
yes,
who's waiting for these two bulls to finish fighting,
yes,
and then go to hospital. Right now, if you go to most of the public hospitals, yes, they are completely deserted. We now have the clinicians, the yes, morticians who have joined. Yes. So God knows how those mortuaries are going to look.
Yes.
Have we done a 360 of the whole story?
Like I have said when we were analyzing the narrative of the politicians, this has nothing to do with the people. The strike of the doctors have nothing to do with the people. The government has done its political calculations, and it has. And you see, I don't remember a strike that has been protracted this long. Always, government has an incentive in wanting to end a strike as fast as possible. They have made their political calculations, and they have realized that there will be no political price to pay because of doctors being on strike. And they've said, sit it out, let it be what it's going to be. The same thing with the opposition. They have looked and they've seen there are no political bonga points to be earned by getting into the mix about, okay? So this leaves the people where they have always been and where they will be unless there are bold enough actors to push a new narrative. We were saying here that the media isn't pushing that narrative. But we also have to ask ourselves, there are certain alternative voices from the margins of the political space, okay? Why are these voices not pushing an alternative narrative? Because if, for example, the doctors' strike does not have any political mileage for NASA and for Jubilee, would it have political mileage for other marginal actors who are trying to come into the mainstream? If, for example, the ethnic narrative has hogged the headlines, these other actors who, they like calling themselves third forces. I have a problem with the concept of third force, because third force assumes there is a first force and a second force. And there isn't a first force and a second force. There is just one, there's just one and the same thing. So these alternative voice, or these wannabe alternative voices are letting the people down, because that is the last frontier where the people would be represented. Because, believe you me, for both the opposition and the government, there is no political prize or political points to be earned from this, and the people are on their own.
Victor, have we downplayed our role, whereby, okay, now we can't use the word third force according to Professor here. But have we been that voice that is silent, that ought to be speaking for the people, especially in regards to the fact that this fight has nothing to do with the people, if what Prof is saying is anything to go by?
Thanks, Mike. Media on the doctor strike and the health crisis, media has done what is practically possible. And we have run stories. We have carried all manner from the doctors, from the suffering Kenyans, from the rest. And there's much that you can expect for a sector to play. But media has done and continues. I've seen most of the newspapers, at least there's a bulletin. There's something on the doctor strike since it started. So that's the much they can give. The other, like you said, competing things, there's the drought, there's the other, now the lecturers. I mean, they're too much. But media has been very consistent. They have diagnosed, they have checked, they have written all they could about the doctor strike. But I think, just like we said, the missing dialogue, the missing interest in all parties to solve the issue has also now weighed on people. I can tell you personally, I lost 2 people, I mean, because of the doctor strike. 2 years ago, I lost my dad because of a doctor strike. Late December, on December 24th, I lost my stepmom because of the doctor strike.
Has that story, your story, for the benefit of Kenyans, has your story been picked, whether it's you or it's another person, been picked by media and highlighted, directly linking the doctor strike to the death of these people?
It did. I personally did a story. Personally, I mean, I've written 6 now commentaries and opinions on the doctor strike from those lessons. I mean, I have a son who is on lifelong drugs, and I feel it when Kenyatta Hospital is dry, and that's where he can only get drugs. I have now to send for drugs from India and the whole process, my own son. So it's something practically I'm feeling, I'm going through. But media has done its best. We have called out even from our own, not just writing, to call whoever friends we have both in government, doctors, to come back and say, yes, we have made a point, yes, it has been hard, where do we move? I mean, for how long will Kenyans continue suffering? Okay. I think I wouldn't
fall to the media.
I hold a slightly different opinion on this. I think, yes, in terms of talking about the strike is on day X, Y, Z, and the talks have collapsed, or the talks are ongoing, or the talks, the mediators have converged, and they've called a meeting, and they've convened a meeting, and the talks are on. That has been covered. Just like we were saying about, the voter registration, breaking down the figures and looking at figures in a different way. How else could we tell the story of healthcare in Kenya in a different way? Look at what Bwire is saying. He's giving us examples of
practical examples of
what people are going through, right? But over and beyond that, what else is actually happening in the Kenyan health system? Can we talk about hospital XYZ? It gets this kind of supplies. It gets this number of gloves in a month. And the doctors actually use this number of gloves in a day. And therefore, this is not sufficient. When you're talking about this one doctor who is posted, just comes out of medical school, is posted to a hospital in Kilifi, and the one doctor is the only doctor who's available for this hospital for over 24 hours. This doctor ends up working X number of hours. This doctor has access to only 2 or 3 nurses. Have we told that story that way? I don't think we have. And I think that's what we need to do, to tell the story from that point that also starts applying the pressure in a way to the government, so that the government can know, well, yeah, you can sit out the doctor strike, but there's something that you cannot ignore. Even after the strike is over, whenever it's called off, there's an issue that you must address, and that is about healthcare for the people.
All right.
To me, I think that the journalists and the media actually have done a fantastic job as far as reporting the crisis in the health sector and the doctor strike is concerned. Because number one, a strike that goes beyond 2 weeks is no longer a strike, because that means that other interests actually will now creep in, and the doctors and even the union itself will now lose the control of the process. When the membership also come in and take over the process, then even the union itself is unable to negotiate with the government. And that is why right now you can see the journalists are struggling to get the accurate information from both sides. And given that both sides are actually a protagonist, the government has its position that is resisting to give in to the pressure and the demands from the doctors. The doctors also have their issues that they want the government to address. So in this particular point, whoever journalists talk to, will always want to give them the story that supports their position. And that's where now the media actually is caught up in between, giving the information that is actually accurate. Some of these doctors, actually, they are my colleagues in the trade union movement. And sometimes I could get it very difficult how journalists were getting it difficult even to access this union officials, actually to give them information. So what the media has done a fantastic job. Politicians have taken over the process indirectly, and I disagree with the professor. The politicians have also taken over the process indirectly, only that they don't want to come out to support or take a position because of probably the implication. Because a strike that has now taken almost 3 months and we are not near the conclusion, then that means that the other factors that are coming, that nobody is ready to address those factors.
All right, and at this point, allow me to bring in Michelle to just give us some feedback and also to chip into the conversation and possibly throw in some questions if you have some, Michelle.
All right, and you know, with this conversation, especially what you began with the numbers and the registration, and whether the media has really interpreted what that means for the Kenyans, quite a bit of feedback coming in here. And there's somebody here, Nyakush, asking, journalists, don't you think you are giving so much airtime to politicians that you didn't take the time to actually explain what this meant to us? But then we also have at Harrison Mumia saying he does not agree with Professor Wainaina that Jubilee and NASA are birds of the same feather. He says here that NASA is the lesser evil. All right, and we'll be discussing that a bit later. Then at Minor Boy says, journalists have not told Kenyans why the doctors are still on strike even after the court order. So I think Kenyans also don't understand. We've been covering so much of the court issues. We haven't really explained the transition that the doctors have been through and why they're still on strike, because Kenyans expected that after the 7 union officials were released, then the doctors' strike is off. Okay. And so some of that was not. And so, yes, there's some of that feedback there on the screen already. And then at Flavor Mbili here, interesting name, it says, Professor Wainaina, politicians have seen no political bonga points on doctors' strike. We are on our own. And this is something I'd like us to focus on. The fact that there seems to be no political price to pay on this doctor's strike, and so politicians really don't care. It's up to the media then to drive that agenda to make politicians care about it.
All right, let's start with Prof. There's a lot of response from your comments. First of all, the fact that you feel that there is no difference between NASA and Jubilee.
Yes, and the person who has sent the comment also agrees with me. And as a political blogger, trust me, I come across this argument every so often, the argument of the lesser evil. And my response is always standard. And I quote somebody who said, if your choice is between the lesser of two evils, then all you will get is the evil of two lessers. Wow. And unfortunately, so what we have is the evil of two lessers, and the evil of two lessers is in the headlines. Number two, what actually decides my lesser evil? We underestimate the grip of the ethnic narrative on the political psyche in this country. So that I wish the lesser evil was, you did not support the doctors, you supported the doctors, and you supported the people, therefore you are the lesser evil, okay? Or I wish the lesser evil was, you support free education, and you support a bit of education, so you are the lesser evil. The lesser evil here is the devil that speaks my language and that comes from my village. That is the lesser evil. So that the argument of who is the lesser evil is still circumscribed by the politicians' ethnic narrative. And this is why I said, if we had an alternative narrative, for example, let me go back to the question of women, for example, okay? Then we can decide the lesser evil is a person who supports women empowerment, and the lesser evil is a person who will enact a third gender rule, okay? So now we are defining lesser evil based on issues. Right now, we are defining the lesser evil, the devil you know, based on the language that the devil speaks and where the devil comes from.
All right, hopefully that convinces them. Maybe it does not. That remains to be seen. All right, let's conclude now on the doctor's strike. And maybe let me come to you, Latif, because you're a journalist and you sit on the desk. What Once a doctor strike has gone on for this long, it gets to a point where even in the newsroom, you really have nothing more to say. Do we have to say anything about it, or do we let it be?
No, you have to keep talking about it, because you see, it affects the people. This is not a matter that, you know, is just resting somewhere in abeyance. It's actually talking
affecting
about
people. People are dying.
There are people who need a doctor today, and they don't have access to that doctor today. And that story still must be told. But I still say that it must be told from that angle. Yes, we can mention it somewhere in the story, you know, that, you know, it's day 92 of the strike, and yesterday's talks collapsed once again. But the story now is what's happening on the ground, and where are we? And not just by saying, you know, 20 deaths have been reported. So yes, there's the deaths, but also there's the other suffering. What's happening? Are people accessing the nurses? Are people not going to hospital now? Where are they now? Where are they seeking treatment? Does it mean that herbalists are now getting more of these patients? Where are the patients going? There's still a story.
There's still a story right there. All right, as we now get to almost our conclusion, Victor, in matters to do now with the doctor's strike, what else can we say? Just like, do you agree with Eric, with Latif, that really now let's look for the story on the ground, and what do these figures say?
Yeah, there is need. I mean, I go to, for example, like I mentioned, I go to Kenyatta, where even somebody wants to go to buy medicine over counter as an alternative, but without even a prescription, you can't buy. You know, practical. I have a friend, Joe, who is a cancer patient, and he goes to Nairobi. He has to import a drug he was buying at 300 and now almost 9,000 from outside, and even getting, and you know, it's so pathetic. I mean, you go to Kenyatta, right, or any other hospital for that matter, and what you are seeing at the face, you go to homes right now, I mean, it's so sad. And to me, in addition to the suffering, the stories we can bring on the screen, I think we need also to reach out. What has been the president's statement on this thing? I mean, are we pushing, like the presidential, the Sunday presidential briefs, for example? Other than just listening to what the director of communication gives us, are people asking questions?
And I think if I could just jump in, the very fact that we've said there's no political mileage in this doctor's strike, and that's why there's literally no political goodwill. But the fact is, without political goodwill, there's probably not going to be an end to this doctor's strike. So how does the media then shape this political mileage that politicians want to be part of the solution?
By telling the story that Victor has just said. You see, when you start telling someone that somebody who has been buying drugs at 30 bob, now they have to buy them at 300 bob and import them. Somebody needs medication. They actually need medication, but they cannot access the next round of medication because their prescription has not been renewed by a doctor. That is a story. And when those stories start, you know, taking number one, and forget about this whole thing of, you know, these regions, if that story stays as number one, that will be political pressure.
And how many people will vote if we have a sick population?
Yes.
I mean, there's a political angle, because if we have all people sick, who will vote? Even this mass voter registration.
Actually, as long as it touches the people, it is political.
And that's where I was coming to. When it touches the people, the doctors and the government cannot agree. This touches on the people, millions and millions of them. We are saying that we continue reporting the impasse. We continue reporting the antagonism. I think, honestly, in terms of radical positions, it is time for the media to take sides. It is time, because when you read the stories that are being reported, there is this pretense to objectivity, that I'm reporting what the doctors are saying, reporting what and you leave it to the reader to decide who is right and who is wrong. I think for so long as they cannot agree, and for so long as the people continue to suffer, it is time for us to take sides. It's time to tell government, pay, or it's time to tell doctors, go back to work.
All right.
Yes, I think the story should now shift to the Wananchi. Actually, what is happening to the hospitals, like Victor said, what are Kenyans going through? Are these Kenyans getting treatment in private hospitals? Can they afford? And if they can't afford, what is happening? I've seen some propaganda, and I think those are some of the things that actually the media is supposed to now to counter and explain to Kenya. That somebody says that, oh, you know, that ever since doctors went on strike from December, and now, looking at this period, there have been less deaths in the hospitals. Where did we get these figures from? And so that is why we are now...
That means people are dying from homes.
Yeah, that means people are dying from homes, and this data actually is not being recorded by someone.
Not verified.
Exactly. So that is why now the story needs now to shift to the people.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll have to wind up right there. And that is Victor Bwire, who's the Deputy CEO for Media Council of Kenya. We also have Eric Odur, Secretary General at the Kenya Union of Journalists, Eric Latif, journalist, and last but not least, we have Professor Michael Wainaina. For now, I'd like to hand over to Michelle Ngele.
All right, and of course,